Hello, everyone. My name is Sam Koplovich, and I'm the chair of the Edmonton Jewish Film Festival Committee. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to today's talk. Before we begin, I would like to thank all of the many sponsors and donors who make the film festival possible. We are very grateful for their support. You will find a list of all their names in our virtual program. I extend special thanks to Fiddler's Journey Film Sponsors Service Credit Union. At this time, the Edmonton Jewish Film Festival wishes to respectfully acknowledge that our festival is held on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community. A few other quick points before we get started. Your sound is muted. Please keep it off so that you won't disturb the speaker with stray sounds. We are recording the session, so remember, you may be on camera. Our speaker will speak for about 35 minutes, and then we will have a Q&A. You can put your questions in the chat. Please direct them directly to the moderator, Neil Gran, at any time during the talk, and we will address them at the end. Today, we are thrilled to welcome our special guest, the very talented Academy Award nominated documentary filmmaker, Daniel Raim. Daniel was born in Israel and raised in the US. He served in the Israeli Defense Forces Education Corps as a documentary filmmaker, making short films about soldiers who performed music and theater for communities living in underground air raid shelters. In 1997, Daniel attended the American Film Institute Conservatory in Los Angeles, where he studied under production designer Robert F. Boyle, an esteemed collaborator of Alfred Hitchcock. Daniel has developed the magic for telling the stories of the unsung heroes of Hollywood. His debut film about Robert Boyle, The Man on Lincoln's Nose, was nominated for the 2001 Academy Award for Best Documentary Short Subject. His 2015 documentary, Harold and Lillian, a Hollywood love story, was nominated for the Golden Eye Award at the Cannes Film Festival. He has also written, produced, and directed dozens of documentaries about cinema masters for the Criterion Collection, including films on John Cassavetes, Buster Keaton, and Alfred Hitchcock. In 2019, Raim directed and produced the documentary Image Makers, The Adventures of America's Pioneer Cinematographers. Fiddler's Journey to the Big Screen, his latest documentary feature, was inspired, it seems, when he was only 13 and saw Fiddler on the Roof for the first time with his grandparents. It was love at first screening. Daniel is based in Los Angeles. Welcome, Daniel. Today's discussion will be moderated by my fellow Film Festival Committee member, Neil Gran. A proud Albertan, Neil began his show business career as part of a comedy troupe called Three Dead Trolls in a Baggie. Today, he is a writer, director, and producer specializing in comedy and documentaries. His films include Queen of the Oil Patch and The Secret History of the Wild West. When he's not working in television, Neil also enjoys radio and was head writer for 6 seasons of The Irrelevant Show on CBC Radio 1. Thank you, Neil, for moderating today's discussion. Take it away, Neil.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for the intro, Sam. You've given so much. You took away 4 of my questions right off the top. So, Daniel, first, thank you so much for being here. Watching the documentary, I just thought it was well told. It was fun. I learned so much, and just some of the lovely moments you captured in the interviews, it was just so good. So I just want to start off saying thank you for that. So I read the credits, produced, directed, edited, even co-written by yourself. That's a tremendous amount of work and quite an achievement. Knowing that huge commitment, what attracted you to telling this story of the making of Fiddler on the Roof?
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the introductions. What attracted me, there's so many like milestones you touched on in the introduction. Sam touched on when I was 13. I came to Fiddler on the Roof. Well, so many people had seen the play first and fell in love with it on Broadway or with Zero Mostel. I came to at the age of 13, not knowing anything about the musical, the music or anything, and saw the movie with my grandparents and was totally transported into the world of Jewish life in Eastern Europe in 1905, which sort of fed my curiosity about Jewish history, Jewish identity, what happened to Jews in Tsarist Russia at that time that pushed them to America or to into Europe. And many years later, when I was a student at the American Film Institute, Robert Boyle, the production designer of Fiddler on the Roof and Alfred Hitchcock films, was my professor. And it was such a treat to study under Robert Boyle, but also kind of learn directly through him about some of the fundamental principles that mean so much to me now about what it means to be a cinema artist.
So how long were you actually on this project? Because I'm looking at some of the interviews that go from 1970 to 2000. How long was it for you?
Yeah, so my first interview for this film was in 2009 with Topol. Shortly within a few weeks of seeing his farewell tour in Los Angeles. That was the first time I'd seen it on stage. And that was in 2009. And I was lucky enough to interview him. You mentioned 1970, when they were filming Fiddler on the Roof, and the National Film Board of Canada sent a crew with 16 millimeter cameras to follow Norman Jewison on location in Yugoslavia, as well as Pinewood Studios. So we were really excited to collaborate and scan some of those masters to incorporate into our film.
So personally though, so it's from 70, like how long of a process is it for you when you start on a feature documentary? Because it looks like a massive project.
100%. Well, it is the bulk of the work started during lockdown in early 2000, when I was able to draw on my interviews that I had over the years while I'm making other projects. I had interviewed Catch of Catch Can, Topol, then Norman Jewison, Robert Boyle, lyricist Sheldon Harnick, with the idea of really absorbing the story of the evolution from a Shalom Aleichem series of short stories into a Broadway production, then into a movie. And over that time, while I'm making other movies, and another documentary had come out called Fiddler, Miracle of Miracles in 2019, which specifically focused on the Broadway production, how the three creators, or the four actually, including Jerome Robbins, the director, how the creators of the Broadway production adapted the Shalom Aleichem material, the Shalom Aleichem stories, and how it continues until today to have cultural relevance all over the world. And in 2020, what I had at that point, I decided to really focus on the story of the making of the movie version of Fiddler on the Roof through the experiences of specifically Norman Jewison. And the big interview with him in the doc is shot in 2016. And I shot that interview shortly after reading his autobiography, This Terrible Business Has Been Good to Me, an autobiography by Norman Jewison. And it's so great because I'm a fan of his work, including Moonstruck and In the Heat of the Night, the Thomas Crown Affair. And after my interview with him in 2016, he inscribed in his autobiography, "Thank you for a great interview about my favorite movie, Fiddler." And to really go a bit more into, well, what made this movie, what gave me the kind of what sparked my imagination or my curiosity is when Norman told me I found myself making Fiddler on the Roof. And that for me was a big question mark that I wanted to sort of bring my team together and let's see if we can tell that story.
Oh, okay. So, and it's interesting how you talk about Norman Jewison, where, you know, this movie, it's called Fiddler's Journey to the Big Screen, but in many ways it seems to be Norman Jewison's journey taking Fiddler to the big screen. Yeah. And with Norman Jewison, what do you think it is about him that attracts you as a documentary filmmaker?
Having known him, number one, so there's a personal connection there. He was so generous with his time in the past when I was making my first documentary about Robert Boyle, The Man on Lincoln's Nose. And he helped with the release of my first feature film, which was, you know, so, and I admired him, you know, as an artist and a storyteller and a filmmaker and as a human being. And I thought, you know, if there ever was an opportunity to make a doc about Norman and tell it through Fiddler, I felt that that's something worth investigating. But please remind me your question. I'm not sure that I'm.
No, it's great. I was asking just about what it was about him that really attracted you, which you were totally answering the question.
Right. Great.
Now, but aside from that, I will go further on it. Aside from him being a personal connection,
yeah,
what is it about him that you think makes a good story?
I'm interested in what, in terms of the documentaries that I make, what makes artists tick, what life experiences inform their work, their vision, what obstacles do they have to overcome internally to realize some of these masterworks of cinema. So in the case of Norman Jewison, I was specifically moved by the fact that just before making Fiddler, he was in a spiritual crisis. And with the death of Bobby Kennedy, someone he had become very good friends with at that point, and felt, where am I going to find the joy to make movies, especially Fiddler? And there's something so magical about the story of Fiddler on the Roof, right? That Norman Jewison, connected with the original stories by Shalom Aleichem. He went to Israel, and that time of spiritual crisis started to feed his soul in a way. And as that movie nourishes and feeds our soul to a degree too. So I think kind of that, all that kind of churning together, as Norman says, is part of what piqued my curiosity, and to want to see if there's what that narrative looks like if we are exploring. But also he's so, you know, the other thing is that Norman Jewison, unlike many great A-list directors from the new Hollywood, right, isn't necessarily a household name. So I thought this would also be a great opportunity to make a documentary that raised sort of attention to the artist behind such a classic movie.
So with Norman Jewison, one of the things, you know, I learned watching the movie was Jewison is not Jewish. And that just blew my brain. I went, what? Mm. When you were making the film, what were some things that you actually discovered?
You know, I so many great stories and anecdotes, you know, from the casting process to hearing about Danny Kaye, you know, wanting the role, and of course Frank Sinatra, to how like Norman is such a great. There's a kind of a famous phrase, the dance that he has to do to get certain people into the film, to get Topol, and the story of getting, of how Norman's process, not just as a director, but as a producer, to go to Chicago, to meet and have drinks at the home of Isaac Stern, right? Who's the greatest violinist at that time, right? And to sweet talk him, you know, I feel like there's so much for me to learn from his process. But what I learned was the magic of the casting brought together this incredible family of actors, including, and for me, so moving to not just have interviewed the three actresses who played Tevia's eldest daughters, right? Michelle Marsh, Neva Small, Rosalind Harris, Hodel Seidel Pava. But in the edit, what I learned is that collectively, that their journey was so meaningful to them 50 years later. They held on to something that they're proud of, and yet it wasn't a launching pad for them. It wasn't, they didn't become great, they didn't become, not great is not the word, but they didn't have big careers following Fiddler on the Roof in the movies. And yet that casting process and what these three actresses brought to it, I think meeting them 50 years later and taking the time to invite an audience to spend a little bit of time with them, you really feel their humanity and their joy and their spirit, and you feel the pain and love and insecurities and all these things that went into making Fiddler on the Roof. And I just felt that was a big discovery for me.
I like that you mentioned the daughters, the lead daughters. So when you interviewed Michelle Marsh, did you know ahead of time she had letters from Norman Jewison?
No. I'm
wow,
glad you
that
asked
must have blown your mind, how when she brought those out.
It was what happened, if I just sort of peek behind the curtain of the documentary filmmaking process.
Oh, and I want to, Daniel. I want to.
is she in advance said, I need you to park in front of the garage so you can bring your equipment through the garage into the living room, lights, gear, cameras, tripod. And as we're walking through with all this equipment, I saw this box in the garage. It said Fiddler on the Roof, handwritten on it. And I said, Michelle, tell me about this box. She's like, oh, that's the evacuation box. And at that time, a lot of, in California, especially where she lives, there's potential for needing to evacuate due to fires. And I said, oh, this is the evacuation box. Do you mind bringing this? Can we incorporate an exploration of this box into the interview? And it was a gold mine. It was a documentary filmmaker's dream, because it really helped open her up in a way to recall and reflect about her inner experience, her journey, her own journey.
Yeah, that was an incredible moment when she pulled out the letter from Norman.
Absolutely huge.
So for you as a filmmaker, when you're doing documentary work, a lot of times, it's from research beforehand, but then you have these moments. What do you feel inside when you kind of get that, and then you've got this person you're interviewing who's totally on board, and you're discovering during an interview, what's going on for you? Well,
I'm actually writing and editing the documentary as I'm doing the interview. But most importantly, I'm having a discussion with her and want her to feel comfortable. And I'm not looking at a series of questions, because I've already, to the best of my ability, prepared the questions and memorized them in my head. But you can prepare for weeks, but then as you said, the first 4 questions were already answered in the introduction. So, it is, in the end of the day, a discussion, and it is, in the day, my job to give her as much comfort as possible, to tell her truth, to share something about her experience that means something to her, and to dig into what that means too.
So on that, what kind of responsibility do you feel as a documentary filmmaker to convey people's truths?
I think that my intention in my documentaries is to balance the especially because I'm making movies about film history, and my interest and focus is on the artists themselves, behind the camera, in this case, in front of the camera. And to humanize Hollywood, to humanize art, what that tension is, to what it means to be a communicator in the visual arts, what it means to be a storyteller or a cinema artist, and the challenges that come with that, and from an inner level. And so I try to, it's a portrait as much as it is. It's not for me a talking head on a, it's not anecdote, it's not sound bites. I hope not. I try to give breathing room and to humanize the actress, the actresses in this case, or any subject, what may be John Williams or Norman Jewison. And I want the scenes that we see with them on screen to be moments in time. To that there's an aspect of cinema as well in what it looks like for me as the editor. I think it's partly why I edit my own documentaries, because there is an inner tempo, an inner rhythm, that dynamic that I'm trying to create.
Oh, well, and you could see that. And there was that lovely moment with Norman Jewison when he was talking about Golda Meir and her touching his arm, and it just got very, very sweet and emotional. So in that moment, you're saying you actually can still stay thinking of it, or do you lose yourself sometimes? Because it would be hard to hear someone of his stature talking about Golda Meir, and
and that's the first time I heard about that. That's the beauty of it too, because you can prepare, and then he's gonna, I didn't know, for example, that the premiere screening was that he sat next to Golda Meir. So this was one of nor did he write about it in his book. So I would say 90% of the interview with Norman is not something I could have planned for. It was really to sort of connect with his journey.
Yeah. Well, when you're you're directing it, you're conducting the interviews, you're doing the editing, and yet I see you've got a co-writer. How does that process work?
A co-writer and a producer. It was the three of us. So Sasha is producing, Michael Srega is co-writing, and it's imagine it's the beginning of the pandemic. we're all on Zoom the way we are now.
Yeah.
And suddenly Zoom becomes the next closest thing to a personal experience, being in the same room, and I can screen share my monitor and show cuts, and the creative process of working with a co-writer, and in this case a creative producer, my process at the least is to share. We all watch the interviews that I've conducted. We all are aware of the fact that another doc had just been made that touches on the Broadway production, and we all agreed immediately that Norman Jewison, was could be potentially the star of the central subject, which for me was amazing, and so we develop, my workflow is I start with a paper edit. So I like to do an assembly cut that's about twice the running time of the finished film, just to see all the stories lined up without too much thought about dramatic narrative structure and narration and images and music. Just let's see how out of the 20, 30 hours of interview footage, what are the best 3 hours, and what really rises to the top from there. And Norman certainly rose, like, to my surprise, right? You'd think, wow, Chaim Topol, there was it was such an interesting project to work on during the pandemic, because there was a little breathing room in May of 2021 between when the word variant wasn't even a thing.
Yeah.
And we were able to get to shoot interviews with John Williams and the three actresses, and Kenny Turan, the film critic, Kenny Turan. And then that evolved, then suddenly you kind of shape a story around that.
Well, yeah, and on that, the interview with John Williams was really excellent. Just Absolutely. Some of his clips. What is it? The closest thing to a human voice there is, and violin, and so when you're interviewing someone like John Williams, and you're trying to stay on topic, do you ever just kind of fan out and start asking them about other stuff?
I did on one occasion. I had to. I won't say what, but
oh, come on! It's only us and a few hundred people.
Right. Oh my goodness. No, listen. Certainly, when we talked about his philosophy of music and what it means to write a score for a movie, and I think he said something along the lines of, that his philosophy is that a score should only contribute to, was it 20 or 30% of the emotion of a scene, right? And certainly what came to mind for me to ask him was about the two moons in Star Wars and the theme, the Skywalker theme. He wrote around that. And I quickly realized that's not going to make it into a movie about Fiddler on the Roof, but I was able to, for the Blu-ray that's coming out in late July, cut together a 6-minute original short piece called John Williams Beyond the Notes, where he really deep dives into the origins, or the origins of Jewish Yiddish music in the Pale of the Settlement, and how that contrasts with other Jewish music in different regions, and then his process learning through his teachers and through his research in Jerusalem prior to making Fiddler on the Roof, and a bit more in depth of what the violin means to him as an instrument. And it's I'm so glad to have put that piece together, because it's something that during the interview, your hands, the hairs on my arm were sticking up, but it didn't make it into the film. So it was a great pleasure to do that for the disc.
But it sounds fascinating. I mean, he must have had some intimidation going onto the project Fiddler on the Roof. Knowing that there's that great property there that he's going to, be asked to not screw up.
Yeah, I think he was excited from the sense I got to work with Norman Jewison. More than anything, that's the real talk about, you asked a question, which I get asked a lot, and I'm glad to be thinking about this answer right now. What's something that I learned, making this film, is that everyone I interviewed, they have a special place in their heart for having worked with Norman Jewison on Fiddler on the Roof, in that order. And that's amazing. There's something, he was the grand conductor. I mean, he brought in Robert Boyle and Oswald Morris, the cinematographer, and John Williams. He handpicked all these all these department heads who weren't Jewish, by the way. Is very interesting, all of them. But and that speaks to another theme that I think is also what I learned from that, making this film too, without intending to, is that, in the realm of storytelling and making art, when you draw on your life experiences, I mean, his soul, Norman Jewison, who's not Jewish, who's a Methodist, thought he was Jewish, but absorbed so much Jewish culture as a young boy from the age of 6, and understood something about Jewish life and Jewish culture, and really put his heart into it. And I think that speaks volumes to what it means to be an artist and telling stories about cultures and topics that are outside of your kind of origin culturally.
Well, I think Jewison seems to be, to me, a bit of a cultural explorer, with his work with Harry Belafonte and Sidney Poitier, and pushing his own boundaries. So I was wondering, I loved hearing the director of photography talk about putting silk stockings in front of the camera, you know, or the lighting, the wedding scene with the candles. Knowing that there was so much just incredible craft that went into Fiddler on the Roof, what was something that you, a craft person, you know, of course, craft can become art. What was something that you had where you went, oh man, I don't know if I have enough time to put this in the film?
Wow, great question. Sammy Bays, it was the assistant choreographer and protege of Jerome Robbins, and he was one of the key artists, choreographers working on Fiddler on the Roof. Sadly, he was unavailable for an interview. I would have loved to include Michael Sregow. Had reached out to him, but unfortunately, by the time we started really shooting this additional interviews in 2021, that would have been really interesting to dig into that. The tension between Jerome Robbins' vision of the choreography and Jewison and how he adapted that for the screen would have been great. I wish I could have gotten into that. Costume design. There are some remembrances that will be on the Blu-ray about some of the actors that passed away, died. Sadly, Norma Crane, who plays Golda, died about 3 years after making Fiddler on the Roof. That discussion will be separate from the film, but on the Blu-ray. The story of Leonard Fry, who plays Mostel, and his impact on the actresses and the friendships. But I also have to say that this is, you know, not, in my mind, the definitive documentary about the making of the movie version. There's so many other facets and people involved, points of view, you know, to explore. Oh
yeah, because there's so much you can look at. I had one kind of question come in here where, and again, if anybody has any questions, you know, you can fire them my way and I'll make sure Daniel gets them. But they're talking about how they loved how you didn't focus on the tensions in the production, because I know there were a lot of stressors with him dealing with kind of production in Yugoslavia, moving to Pinewood and stuff. And what made you kind of focus more on his spiritual journey rather than on his kind of technical battles?
Because, great question. I think that's where my curiosity lies, personal. That's the area of I think fundamentally, what are the inner battles as opposed to the external battles? I think that for me, number one, is something that I think I lean into that more, because those are things that I'm dealing with and learning about. And I make films to learn about myself too.
Yeah, I could see that in the interviews with Rosalind Harris and Neva Small and Michelle Marsh, where it just seemed to be, it really felt like there was a really good connection there. I could almost see a documentary called The Three Sisters, you know?
Certainly.
Because when you're interviewing them, and it did seem like you must have been quite affected by those interviews as well, because they did get a lot of time in your documentary. How were you affected by those three women and their really special stories? They
have a life force in them that I felt when I was 13 watching the movie. And Norman Jewison elicited such great performances from three non-actors, and many others were non-actors. And I think that's incredible. And Topol is taking his the Tevye from the stage in London, you know, to the screen, and Norman's working with him. But remind me your question again. Sorry.
I wanted to know what you've taken away as a person from your experiences with those women that seemed to, it was very touching.
I think I was moved when I saw in the edit how collectively what the kind of cumulative effect they have as a story, the three of them. And again, I mentioned the spirit and the life force and the humanist. I would say that if there wasn't a pandemic, to your point about a doc called The Three Daughters or The Three Sisters, I would have loved to follow them in their everyday as a verite film as well, but that was not possible for me to travel to New York at that time.
So I have a question here. Why was he shooting at Pinewood and not Hollywood?
They set up camp in London. It's such a great question. A lot of Hollywood movies were shot at Pinewood Studios for probably, it's such a great question. I don't have the full answer for that.
Okay.
I think there might be like a lot of the musicians, were also the orchestra that they put together and the technicians, and Ozzie Morris was from London. So they always knew they were going to be shooting this in London.
I read a biography of his recently, and someone mentioned that he didn't want to really go back to working in London much after that because of all of the problems with unions and such.
Wow. Okay.
I wanted to ask you though about how'd you get Jeff Goldblum to be the narrator?
It wasn't that hard in the sense that I think he was, well, here's the backstory that might help better understand the process that I went through. I had a short list of names of actors that I thought might make a good lend their voice. And I was going down the list, and that week, there was a news story that Jeff Goldblum impromptu sang the famous Fiddler song Sunrise Sunset to a couple getting married in a park in Brooklyn that he happened to be walking by. He's such a musical person. And I'm like, this guy loves Fiddler on the Roof, and what a beautiful story. And I'm a fan of Jeff Goldblum. And I felt that he could add us, he could contribute beautifully to the doc. And he said yes. And we're all very thrilled to have him as part of the film.
Now, as someone of Goldblum's stature and probably his cost, how much time do you have with him? Are you, can you work things back and forth, or do you just have to, I don't know, get time?
Yeah, we had an afternoon with him at a recording studio in Los Angeles, and the creative process was we printed out the narration script, but what I would do is I wanted him to have a sense of the tone of each section. So I wouldn't show him the clip. What I actually did is I invited him into the studio outside of the booth. He would come in and play for him the piece of music, the original composition that my composer created that was the bed of that scene. And he could certainly grasp through the story, for example, of the painted shul, right? How they recreated the synagogue, and there were no synagogues after the wooden synagogues, painted synagogues after the Holocaust. They'd all burned down. The composer, the piece of music was elegiac, and he got the sense of it. And so I feel like he was able to deliver in 2 or 3 takes. And so it was a very successful, I think, afternoon with him, and that process seemed to work.
Oh, that's great. And how did you pick, is it Turan? Kenneth Turan?
Kenneth Turan.
How did you choose him kind of to be really kind of your reviewer voice in the documentary? Yeah.
I think it was co-writer Michael Stragow's idea, knowing that Kenneth Turan was also a member. So he was the lead film journalist for the LA Times for a very long time, and then he had retired a couple of years ago. But he was also a board member with the Yiddish Book Center, and and so that, worked out great. I had interviewed other authorities and scholars, but it was so great to have Kenny's voice in it. And I think that was the best out of all.
And now the documentary is, it was really quite positive and supportive of what Jewison had done on the movie. Turin seemed to be the one voice that questioned him, where it was kind of, oh, maybe we should have gone with Zero Mostel for this, or
100%, yeah. And he's not alone. There are people who saw the Broadway production mesmerized by Zero Mostel. Like that was that's Fiddler on the Roof, right? And it's not just Zero Mostel, it was Jerome Robbins, who was the director and choreographer of the Broadway production, really came in and brought, Joe Stein, who wrote the libretto and the script, and Sheldon Harnick, the lyrics, and Jerry Bach, the score. He kind of brought focus and intention and made Fiddler on the Roof, but he also drew on Chagall's paintings, right? And there was a sort of a theatrical, surreal, abstract world that you're brought into. And Jewison, that House of Cards just went down, and he started from scratch, and he wanted to shoot this like a documentary in a way, and casted an Israeli actor, Chaim Topol. And Kenny took issue, and others took issue, that this is not the Zero Mostel. Excuse me, this is not the Tevye the Milkman we know and love. This is such a different approach. And I think it's important to have other voices, other opinions. I don't want to aggrandize what Norman did, and make it that's why, again, this is not the definitive doc. There's other takes. And I think it's important to hear other points of view.
Yeah, no, it was interesting too. It was kind of like that. I didn't like the Hebrew Tevye. I wanted the Yiddish Tevye.
Right. Yes. I haven't seen the Yiddish version, sadly, but I'm dying to see the Yiddish Broadway, the Yiddish production that was in New York.
I have another question in here. It's, can you ask Daniel about how he got this produced? How did he put together the financing for it, and how did getting it all put together impact your ability to tell the story?
Yeah. It starts off with me going out and doing interviews on my own, paying a cinematographer and a sound recordist just to get in the can the essential interviews. So that's most documentaries are self-financed in that respect. And then as we really started to edit this and develop it into a feature, the financing, the cash cost to make it largely came from fundraising, and fiscal sponsorship, having a fiscal sponsorship, and getting executive producers on board that believe in the story. Documentaries really don't make that much money, unfortunately. Seldom, some do, but in this case, this was truly a labor of love. And the other thing about it is that I am an editor. And so usually one of the most expensive parts of the documentary, you're just paying an editor for up to a year of work. And so I invested in the film through my, and as well as my team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's, and it shows. It shows that you had that time to put in the editing. And I was wondering, you did use illustrations at some point in the movie. What was, where did that come from?
Artist Patrick Mattei, who I've been collaborating with since 2015, when we made the Harold and Lily in a Hollywood Love Story. And he's one of the great animators going back 30 years in Hollywood, and DreamWorks and Sony. And so it was great to work with him. But unlike my other projects, this was just really a a shorter, I didn't use the graphics and illustrations and animation as much as I had in other docs and other projects, which were kind of driven by his work. But thank you for asking.
No, they were great. They look theatrical. They look like, they had that theatrical vibe to them. I wanted to, there was this thing about where Bobby Kennedy came into the film, the stories of him, and it was quite amazing to hear how he was going through so much and had that friendship with Bobby Kennedy. And I remember Bobby Kennedy told Norman, timing is the most important thing in life. How important do you think timing is in life?
Yes, it's a great, I think for me, to answer your question, he says, Norman is quoting Bobby Kennedy, says, in art and politics and in life itself. And I certainly had, when we made this film, we never anticipated what would be happening in the world today, right? The first war in Europe since after World War II. And, the story of Fiddler on the Roof is set, the shtetl Anatevka is just out, it's based on a village just outside of Kiev in Ukraine. And the scenes of Norman Jewison filming the Exodus. So when our film, Fiddler's Journey, started to be seen by audiences, it was at the same time as the conflict in the war in Ukraine. So that somehow is one of those unexpected, that was very unexpected and somehow added a different resonance to the documentary, a new resonance to the documentary.
Uh-huh.
So to answer your question, it's the one example I have where sort of timing, you can't timing, you can't predict. I don't think great artists are predicting what's going to happen. But oftentimes in the case of In the Heat of the Night, Norman made the film the world needed at that time.
Right. So when you were just getting everything put together and you've got hours, I think you said 30 hours of interviews and such, how do you know which order to put your clips in when you're just starting out?
Yeah, it takes time. It's like writing a screenplay and then you shoot it, and then a movie's, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, is written 3 times. It's written in pre-production when you're kind of mapping out the questions and the interviews and what the subjects are. It's written again, during the shoot itself while I'm doing the interviews. And then it's written a 3rd time and finally in the edit. And it's kind of like peeling an onion, figuring out what is, having the discipline to really strip everything away but the essential idea of what this is. And once it became more and more clear that this is Norman's story and can be Norman's story, other aspects and topics that I wanted to include, such as a deeper discussion of Shalom Aleichem and maybe more about Topol's journey. All these things will be on the Blu-ray, but having the discipline to really strip it to its essential core idea certainly takes time. And it's like peeling an onion and having the reference of dramatic narrative structure to help organize the story so that it does kind of culminate into a thematic kind of idea at the end.
Okay. So this is my last question, so I want to hit you with a tough one. When I was watching the movie, one thing that just stuck with me, and you mentioned it about the dance. He's taught, and I think of him, how he does seem to have something of a dance about him, and and it just, that stuck with me. And you've talked to him so many times. What would you say is a nugget or something that you take away from knowing Norman Jewison and speaking with him that would be of assistance to you in your own life?
In my own life.
Yeah.
Wow.
As a documentary filmmaker, you're in the same zone as him.
Yeah. But in life, that's a great question. I think that make films that feed your soul, right? Tell stories that mean something to you, because if it doesn't mean something, you don't feel it here, how is the audience gonna feel that exploration or that pain or that happiness or the joy and pain or whatever it is you want to convey or explore? Because we're not making propaganda, we're trying to explore, we're asking questions, but these are questions that have to mean something to the filmmaker, and that feeds you, and I think that enriches you and helps you grow as a person.
Well, that comes through in Fiddler's journey to the big screen. You can feel like your love and admiration for Norman Jewison, just in speaking with the sisters, just the treatment itself. I thought it was just excellent, and I'd like to thank you for just being here for the Q&A and just letting us chat with you.
Cheers, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel.